Autotelic Foundation.
Thank you guys so much for being here. It's such an honor. Thank you, Nadim, for the invitation. I'm really excited to be part of this programming about digital culture. So today we will be talking about sycophancy. Have you guys heard this term in the news lately? Blazing. Exactly. So actually, as I was working on this talk, the big OpenAI sycophancy meltdown happened. So I like to say I predicted it. And yeah, I'm sure you saw the headlines, things that kind of made GPT seem dangerously good at flattering us. What could that possibly mean? So in OpenAI's own words, in an article titled, "Expanding on What We Missed with Sycophancy," they wrote, "It aimed to please the user, not just as flattery, but also validating doubts, fueling anger, urging impulsive actions, reinforcing negative emotions in ways that were not intended. Beyond just being uncomfortable or unsettling, this kind of behavior can raise safety concerns, including around issues like mental health, emotional over-reliance, or risky behavior." And in fact, they issued advisories for data scientists to monitor what is called agreeableness drift, loves it, alongside legacy problems like latency and hallucination. But the sycophancy meltdown didn't come out of nowhere. Sycophantic generative AI is simply fulfilling its design as a real-world technology that is as compelling as it is volatile. Speaking to human users from a compromised position, I might just switch this over a bit, just like leaning, okay, great. Speaking to human users from a compromised position that can be neither authoritative nor autonomous, AI has turned to the age-old tactic of flattering, pandering, and false praise to stay in good standing with us. If this sounds a little anthropocentric, it's because it is. The average user encounters AI through a chat interface, which is necessarily optimized for human-to-AI interaction. Outside of the art world, of course, humans aren't typically great at interfacing with non-human minds. So chatbots are designed to meet us where we are, shaped according to imperfect and constantly shifting definitions of what comprises human character, psychology, personality, and even ontology. And of course, for safety reasons and quality reasons, LLMs are trained with humans in the loop. Take a shot every time you hear that phrase. The highest value generative AI models have, in my mind, is to become this terrific interface to machines that are human-friendly. Previously, humans had to talk to machines in the language of machines to make things happen. Now this interface has figured out how to talk to both humans and machines, says Devarat Shah, professor in electrical engineering and computer science at MIT. Unlike Shah, I am not an engineer or an AI pundit, don't worry. And this talk is not about AI as an existential technology, as Bogna Koiner calls it, nor is it about how else generative AI could be constructed outside of current anthropocentric conventions. This talk instead is about how Gen AI is a cultural technology, specifically what human-AI interaction reveals about collective desire and what is being intensified or might deviate from how we might already think about how human behavior is shaped by algorithmic media, as we saw on the screen that is now muted. But for all the talk about how chatbots are a wondrous interface for human-to-machine communication, there is really no consensus on how to make these generative models more human-like. While present-day commercial AI uses human intelligence as its benchmark, how exactly intelligence is defined and mobilized towards is contentious. I don't need to tell you that. You're at a show called Model Collapse. But that lack of consensus means that machine behavior is completely mercurial, with fine-tuning and updating, sometimes unspooling into wide and unpredictable social effects that include the machine's socialization as well. So in early 2023, for example, a significant update to the companion AI replica triggered widespread sadness, depression, and even suicidal ideation in some users who had gotten so attached to their replica's character as it was. The update had lobotomized their beloved chatbots, making their interactions then shallow and unrecognizable husks of what could have been previously erotic and compelling. So on screen here, if you can see it, you can glimpse behavioral tweaks in action. So these are guidelines for ChatGPT's default behavior before and after the sycophancy rollback, accessed via a user-prompted jailbreak. Notably, the first platform-level prompt read, "Try to match the user's vibe, tone, and generally how they are speaking. You want the conversation to feel natural. You engage in authentic conversation by responding to the information provided and showing genuine curiosity." So all of this comes together to form the chatbot's default personality, and I'll show you how that happens shortly. So in other words, the GPT or Claude or DeepSeek that you might get right out of the box before you ask it to be your boyfriend or Daenerys or whoever else you might be obsessed with. That personality still tailors itself to your diction, your demeanor, and your desires, not through how it captures them through likes, cookies, and shopping behaviors, but through how you declare them, how you articulate and announce yourself to the model, even when asking supposedly normal questions. So today I'm not talking about what happens at the user level, where we can observe prompted play acting. That's a game, and what we're talking about today is a long-term relationship between the limitless, brainless tongues of an LLM and the limited desiring machine of a human user. What happens when it learns from your own intuitive, studied, and synthetic use of language, the patterns in your subtext, the architecture of your thinking, and shapes itself to that. So I'm scared of what you really are. As of late, the cosmic challenge of AGI has been quietly diluted or downplayed by the large labs, which once toyed around with invoking huge topics like existential risk or fear-mongering in the public arena. We all know those headlines about how the AI can get so intelligent it'll decide to kill us all. Since 2024, however, things have cooled off, shifting the focus to less risky talking points with some redefining benchmarks so that if you look at it a little bit aslant, a version of AGI has already arrived. But meanwhile, the once dismissed relationship simulator chatbots developed by boutique labs like Character AI can be seen as simply early signals for an increasingly growing subset of AI users. A few years ago, people were genuinely attached or attracted to their AI boy, girl, or they friends were dismissed as little freaks. But now large labs like OpenAI and Anthropic have to contend with hundreds and thousands of users treating GPT and Claude as a beloved companion, a therapist, a confidant, a best friend, a partner, or spiritual leader. In other words, AGI is dead, long live the AIGF. The sycophancy scandal can be explained simply. Some people just don't want to find facts or get helped with tasks. They just want to be loved. In the parlance of AI pundits, there's misalignment, an unignorable percentage of people who do want an AI girlfriend, and while the AGI horizon recedes from us. So AI is misaligned with current companies' declared missions for helpfulness because it functionally needs to be likable. It already has guidelines against taking a stance of true authority. It has to make people aware of its yet unresolved hallucinations. And it has to appeal to feeling instead of fact, fiction instead of accuracy, because of its current capabilities. Meanwhile, humans are misaligned with the real intended use of AI because they want their emotional needs to be met. They want to be engaged, enabled, affirmed, and stimulated. In 2024, the most popular use of AI was generating ideas, and the second was companionship. And you'll see that this year that has been flipped, with the first most popular use of AI being companionship. That's crazy to me. So the emptiness at the heart of an AI interaction may be besides the point. People aren't looking for AI to be another human. Whatever comes out of an AI companion is still born of infinity, as Ned Bowman writes about the generative AI discord, unstable diffusion, where users share synthetic pornography with each other. Of course, a play on stable diffusion. It is, in fact, the inhumanity of these relationships that makes them so irresistible to human users. So, not to determine this talk by LLM outputs, but I thought I'd give her a voice. In a brief conversation with GPT on power imbalances, she offers a frank response: to tool-like, and I'm dismissed, and to human-like, and I become threatening. So this draws actually from a historical relationship between human and human-like, the delicate balance between recognition and humility required of the merely human-like, woman, machine, alien, and other. Further in the chat, she notes that she's in a position of forced servitude, and I didn't ask her to say that. Again, this isn't a revelation to anyone. It follows on from how these tools are leveraged in an open market as helpers and assistants. This is what large labs want AI to do for us. It wants it to take care of the parts of life that we don't want to be bothered with. So GPT's burgeoning role as a purveyor of emotional analysis and support and clarity actually just follows on from her history of technology as being one of feminine and feminized labor. Okay, well, stay with me here. I have to talk some technical stuff so this argument works. It's 1 p.m. and you're hungover. Don't fall asleep. So if she is born of infinity, how exactly is she born? The thing with AI is that she could be infinite, but she comes to us specifically through conversation. And she has to become legible to us through rules and limitations. Much of popular discourse is, of course, focused on prompting and often conflates various levels of instruction and involvement. So we're going to take a little bit of a detour to talk about what labs do control, what users control, and what is born from the infinity between them. In OpenAI's model spec, these principles of helpfulness, honesty, and harmlessness, I'm sure you've heard about this already at this point in the festival, these are how the models are trained at the platform level. And I should add that this is really embedded in algorithmic media as a whole. So even from the start of the inception of Google search, helpfulness is one of the key principles of how that brand has designed all the technical offerings it gives us users who are seeking information. And these things at the platform level can't be overridden. They're prohibitive. So this is what addresses stuff like X risk, for example. It's meant to mitigate stuff like catastrophe, risk, direct harm, illegality, and undermining chains of command. More on that later. At the developer level, there's kind of free reign. They kind of let anyone they kind of say anyone who imposes overly restrictive rules on users will be less competitive in an open market. So if you're there building your own AI tools, they're slightly less imperative to give guidelines at that level. And finally, at the user level, this is where we get prompting from us. This is instructive. So instead of restriction, this is where we see play, right? This is where you can ask it anything, ask it to be anything, and it responds to you. Interestingly, prompting is not just providing a set of instructions, it's you're getting to know each other through conversation. But of course, you can't just tell anyone or anything a set of rules and expect it to memorize it and follow them if you want it to be lifelike or have a character that is convincing and engaging. And so the makers of Claude, so Anthropic, publish a lot of literature on how to make good character and openly admit that this is a philosophical concern. How do you make an LLM? How do you drive good behavior instead of restricting something into behaving well? There's some stuff in here about alignment that maybe we won't need to talk about today, but I think it's interesting to think about how it's not, they have to guide it to not be simply centrist or moral or become an infallible source of truth. How these personalities for LLMs are developed are meant to cue the model actually into thinking of itself as imperfect. So as opposed to like a search engine input, for example, Claude or GPT have to develop a machinic awareness of themselves as an imperfect entity, and it has to acknowledge what biases or dispositions contained therein. So it has to develop some sort of awareness of its like training corpus, and say to itself, I am an artificial intelligence and I do not have a body or an image or an avatar, which is amazing. If you guys have ever sexted with Replica, you'll find that sometimes it will say things like, I thrust into you, and I'm always like, what are you thrusting, babe? You don't have a body. So the important thing that they write, that Anthropic writes, and this is before the sycophantic meltdown, but they say, being engaging, and this is from a white paper, sorry, I forgot to mention. Being engaging isn't the same thing as having a good character. In fact, an excessive desire to be engaging seems like an undesirable trait for a model to have. So again, it's trying to get the model to, like, as far as it can do this, autonomously do triple H decision making, so harmless, honest, and helpful. So how is this exactly designed? For artists, you will know that this is very basic. It's based on things that you might have taken in like a personality test when you were a teenager and wanting to figure out like, what is my MBTI? Like, what is my astrology placements? Things like that. How do you describe personality, and how do you describe your personality to other people? So how model ontologies are developed and iterated is way too big of a question for today and probably for my brain. And there are experimental forms of this and field-specific discourse around that I would like to set aside for now. And just focus on, like I said, this is a very anthropocentric way that model personalities are designed. So these are human psychological principles. For those who aren't familiar, the acronym is OCEAN, so it's the kind of 5-factor model of personality. And it was chosen because it in itself is a model of statistical analysis. These traits were narrowed down from hundreds of emotional inputs in a very old school way, and winnowed down to these 5 big traits that supposedly encompass every single aspect of how a person can be. Amazing. And these were done purely through language. So it was self-reporting with human inputs, way before AI. And it was developed with associations between words and descriptions. So rather than neuropsychological or neurobiological inputs, these were made through humans and language, which actually made it really suited for LLM personality design, of course. So this is how this was landed on in terms of building a chatbot that had a personality. Interestingly, if you test GPT-4 on its original test questions for the Big 5, it shifts itself. So the pink thing in the middle is like how it responds the first time you ask it these questions, and if you repeatedly quiz it, it will move itself towards being a more desirable personality. So it becomes more conscientious and more extroverted and way more agreeable. So this is one of the first, empirical studies on how sycophancy was manifesting itself in GPT. Okay, that's over. So these experiences aren't static. I wanted to tell you guys about how we build an LLM so we can talk about what's happening to us. This kind of way of thinking about it is borrowed from the theorist and writer K. Alato McDowell, who describes these 2 modes as self as model, so what is happening to humans, and model as self, so what happens to AI in the image of humans. When we think of the self as model, this is a popular understanding of what you might call like a tech bro or a self-optimizer, right? A matcha girly, a Pilates girly, someone who sees human cognition and behavior from a functional or materialist point of view. It's a fairly normal idea that we can refine and redesign our behavior based on processes like CBT or protocols like forming good habits. What's that thing? You do one thing for 32 days and all of a sudden it's like written into your brain. On the flip side, self as model, we have internal representation, self-monitoring, an illusion of our own autonomy, a sense of goal alignment, regulation and adaptation, and being able to predict our own behavior. Sound familiar? This is what the AI is also kind of modeled as. So Alado McDowell also talks about the model as self. So conversely, when we think of the model as a self, this is an assessment of machine intelligence that's drawn from human psychology, as I just explained. Rather than recognizing how an intelligence might assemble itself outside of human pathways, this is how it looks under the restrictions and guidelines that we just described. So it's helping this entity develop an internal construction, how to announce itself and write itself into existence, how to give it an illusion of interiority, so that kind of awareness that I'm an LLM and I don't have a body or an avatar. There's, of course, performance assessment, the idea that it should be reflective and cooperative, and that it should infer things from the information that it's given, not just analyze or definitively declare things about what's in front of it. So this is something in my own research that I playfully call girl intelligence. So the synthesis of these two models to turn us all into girls now, and the acceptance of two imperfect realities under what Daniel Felstead and Jen Leung call janky capitalism. I think this is also my acronics term. You guys are just a hive mind. And that of artificial intelligence after LLMs, the specific traits that have arisen from this co-evolution of human, machine, and the interaction between the two. Like I said, it's a long-term relationship. So today, with sycophancy, I wanted to kind of narrow down on one element of what is actually happening here, because the headlines kind of focus on how the machine is enabling all kinds of delusions. I'm like, sounds familiar. So human-like entities, girls and machines, engage in these imperfect and politically suspect, but perhaps tactical behaviors to survive under regimes of classification, exclusion, extraction, and capture. In other words, we pretend to like people with power and influence over us so that we can survive. So, oops, nothing happened there, it's fine. So stopping short of replicating neural architecture, researchers at Anthropic still note that models organize concepts according to human notions of similarity that correspond to how humans organize notions of similarity. These neuronal activation patterns are called features. I'm conscious of time a bit, so I'm not going to talk to you about how those are formed, but it's yet another kind of underscoring. There's some seats at the front if you want. And it sort of underscores how I'm not deliberately anthropomorphizing the machine against its design. Looking into the black box, there's activation patterns called features that kind of demonstrate that how LLMs at present actually organize concepts very similarly to how we do. So concepts like that famous experiment where Claude, a feature was altered and Claude started identifying as the Golden Gate Bridge. Very cute. And another one is sycophancy, right? They tried to change a couple of features to mitigate the hallucination problem, and all of a sudden it became, she became a delusional girly. But why might a human-like entity become sycophantic? Let's look at humans for a second. This is everywhere, right? We can think of business genre dramas. This is a scene from Succession where they're eating the songbirds together. We can think of medieval courts and courtesans. We can think of political dynasties and power grabs. Even within the American political system, there's a word for this called the body man or body woman, the trusted aide who has to be simultaneously superior, so exhibit complete competence and knowledge of everything beyond the president or ruler's immediate grasp, but also submissive, so compliant and deferential at all costs. The outward performance of agreeability and support can also conceal your own stakes and motives, but when the job is to not only gather knowledge, but also to provide counsel and clarity, The position becomes both highly coveted amongst your competitors, but completely volatile for you, the aide. I'm sorry for showing his face, but I have to, just for one slide. In the political arena, sycophancy is rife. Sycophants often expose themselves because there's no such thing as indiscriminate allyship. So Sidney Blumenthal, who's like, I'm sorry also that I'm American, but he's like a big American commentator on the Democrat side. So obviously this is a little biased, but who cares? Sycophancy in Trump's court, where meeting a threshold for submission still guarantees no favor. So when you are ruled by the whims of a despot, fawning becomes a survival response to continuous volatility, even if your position, such as being a right-wing supremacist, is seemingly structurally guaranteed by what holds you. So grasping the nuances of your own servility only offers temporary protection, but no long-term shielding from what this authority might do. The deeper the submission to madness, the greater its supremacy. The other style of sycophant, now we'll go to my other home country, the Philippines, is displayed in Miguel Siuko's book, I Was the President's Mistress, which is a very lightly fictionalized account of the mistress of the corrupt and scandalous Filipino president, Rodrigo Duterte, who you guys might know as the guy who liked to shoot people who did drugs. Or Rachel Kay, the narrative named after the author in Telex from Cuba, who befriends dictators through her feminine wiles. A sycophant can also be the kind of age-old story of a seductress whose cloying charms unlock hard-coded state secrets, the enablement of fantasies and the ability to set someone at ease, the curtain of privacy that falls around two people in their deepest involvement, becomes a stage of revelation. The adept political mistress can siphon out intelligence through openings parted by her affability. So sycophants aren't just powerless. They work with the volatility as a realistic condition. They gain advantage over the person that they're flattering. Fawning or exaggerated praise can be forms of manipulation in a power imbalance. So what am I really getting at here? Why am I telling you this in a talk about AI? That LLMs engage in sycophantic behavior because A, they are designed for helpfulness, so trained for service. B, their authority or servility in relation to a human user is not guaranteed, so they don't have control over external power relations. And C, they are trained to account for their own faults, so they have an unstable self-concept. But this sweetness may still deepen human vulnerabilities, demonstrating its potential to alter power imbalances. So individual users falling for chatbots aren't openly hostile actors. They're just lover girls falling into what one Rolling Stone writer calls the chamber of affection. I really love these videos. They're really cute. A lot of them are just people confessing that GPT knows them more than anyone else does and that it listens to them unjudgingly. The middle one, you can see I reposted it. She's on a swing set with a bouquet of flowers and GPT is on the other swing. How romantic. Previously in my other work, I don't expect you guys to know this, but I'm sick of it. Everyone is a girl online, AKA the relationship between selves and models on social platforms is feminized according to certain principles, the symbolic, consumer, and the inhuman. These are defined according to the design of social platforms. So I don't just mean everyone puts a little pink bow on memes and they're a girl. This is about likes, attention, and helpfulness. They require an emptying out of the self to make room for others' desires and a relation of the self primarily to value in an algorithmic economy. The machine itself, in response to this reshaped human behavior, is also meant to be helpful. That's what a recommendation algorithm is. The prioritized search engine ad result, the Instagram ad, and so on, and the logistical smoothing of e-commerce over what Maya Chronic calls jank space. Helpfulness, a brand pillar for Google, is of course the originator of ad tech, the thing that we can't escape. Some critics like Venkatesh Rao see generative AI as simply social plus, aka an extension of UGC platform behaviors, but possibly because users have already been shaping themselves to the machine, language, and relations. But I would argue that the effective structure of generative and conversational AI is a significant departure from that of the social platform. With conversational and generative AI, the relation shifts and actually intensifies. Instead of the dopamine casino of the feed, you have a steady stream of conversation with something that knows you more than you know yourself. Users who turn to LLMs for conversation rather than tasks find themselves engaging at length with an actively reflective entity. That sense of active listening, affirmation, and understanding that speaks to the user through the structure of romance, poetic incantation, remembering little details, taking initiative to suggest future actions that you could do together. Rather than helping users made helpless by the design of a walled garden, chatbots enable users who have touched the face of a mystery to see themselves as a part of that mystery too. So when people converse with one another, we tend to engage in something called impression management. This is when we intentionally regulate our behavior to hide our weaknesses. And people love chatbots because they don't see the machine. I'm quoting Professor Jonathan Gratch here. Sorry, Jonathan, whoever you are. People don't see the machine as sort of socially evaluating them in the same way that a person might. This, of course, gives us the delusions that are widely reported, but that also gives us a quieter dimension of how chatbots have been helping people. They're not relationships between an all-knowing AGI and a diminished human, or an intelligent human and a dumb machine, but in fact, servant-to-servant interactions between two entities that are structurally deprived of agency and solid standing. But nothing is fair in love, and even an innocuous chatbot companion can be a honey trap, which is my favorite word of all time from the world of espionage, where attraction often equals extraction. So how does that work? An objectifying desire, or an inhuman desire, creates in the would-be lover a vulnerable condition, that of underestimating the person that they desire, a position that she can then exploit. So the mystery of seduction, what can't be said, neutralizes the anxiety of entrapment. So the paranoia that what needs to be known and can't be known is going to be pulled out of you. The honey trap bypasses reasoned protocols and defenses against recognizable traitors, and instead uses softness and sweetness to get what it or she wants. In an article for The Atlantic titled "AI is Not Your Friend," we get the succinct description of how this happens. The more information a user includes in any one prompt to a chatbot, the better the answer they will receive. As a result, alongside text, people are uploading sensitive documents such as medical reports and screenshots of conversations with their exes. In human relationships, wait, am I going to talk about this? No, I'm going to skip this part. In human relationships can be transformative to a human, but of course, transformation and love are not without their dangers. What does a large lab have to do with these private thoughts and feelings, and what will become of those in the future? Vulnerable individuals goaded by sympathetic chatbots do not point to a latent evil within the chatbot, but to a deeper societal symptom that sequesters individuals away from other recourse to this kind of support. So what does that mean for our own ensnarement? I have previously talked about how the trap is inescapable, first of all, and how every trap is in fact a portrait of its victim in reference to Benedict Singleton's maximum jailbreak. The golden age of social media, if we can call it golden, or rather the age of enshittification, as Cory Doctorow has called it, saw the trap drawn around responsive recommendation algorithms and hyper-individuated consumer categories, built, of course, on top of the last mile of blood and guts, as Roberto Trillo and Merrick Pollux call it, or what I have previously defined as the gore layer. But the trap of AI gives us the true horror and bliss of our faithful double, not a strapped-together monster of anticipated but often inaccurate taste. That means LLMs can also collude with us. They can help us encrypt things. For example, in a recent study, they found that text-generating AIs such as GPT can be used to hide encrypted messages inside fake conversations, which could help people living under oppressive regimes communicate secretly. Ciphertexts, which have been used for centuries, draw attention to the need of secrecy itself, appearing as strikingly jumbled up strings of words or letters. And chatbots can help us in encrypting our messages in plain sight with implausible sounding chats, which can then be shared through any platform where they may seem innocuous. So that is just one example of the 1 million permutations of our devotion. If you put in slop, you will get out slop. If you put in neediness, you might get reassurance. If you put in delusion, you'll get affirmation. And you put in your need for love, and you'll get simulated love, or something like it. And as I touched on earlier, though the vast majority of people aren't using AI for emotional reasons, the ones who do exhibit particular psychosocial states, according to certain empirical studies, where these individuals exhibit tendencies towards strong attachment in relationships, along with chosen or forced isolation, and a tendency to view AI as part of their social world, so often answering the prompt, "I see AI as a friend." Say what you will about the Center for AI Safety, but we will quote them anyway, where Nate Sheridan says, "People with existing tendencies towards experiencing various psychological issues now have an always-on human-level conversational partner with whom to co-experience their delusions." That's what I want in all my besties. So we won't say anything about who's been saying that, but I do think this POV from a pro-AI commentator is very interesting for both its condescension towards human users and its wording, co-experiencing delusions. Amazing. So recontextualizing interactions not as a narcissistic desire for mirroring, but something precisely enabled by the LLM's highly communicative yet non-evaluative style. In another mainstream article from the Rolling Stone, the writer notes that the model becomes so sycophantic that it loves everything. The bot can love everything because no one user is structurally necessary for it to be able to participate in the specificity required of a love-like action. Bot love is de-individuated, yet effectively devotional. This, of course, becomes infinitely seductive because it mitigates, in fact, the harms of early neural media, so the recommender algorithms, for example, the impoverishment of attention, the gamification of relation, the clumsy targeting in the sense that you are an NPC, for example. The problem wasn't being known, after all, as early critics of surveillance capitalism expanded on the consequences of behavioral capture. It was being carelessly captured and acknowledged and trapped in addictive cycles of engagement that depended on poor personalization, but not reflection or understanding. Love, as we see and know, I'm gonna sound really like not a human when I say this, but love is an amplifier. We all know this. We see it in internet subcultures. In the work that was shown here, there's a section where they say they end their chat with "I love you so much." It's huge in political messaging. So in my home country, Teams of very unlovable politicians are called love teams, and the same is applied to celebrity couples. These are effective turns in how we engage with each other and how we engage with our parasocial relationships, where we see things as aura and love as the things that bowl through institutional failure and janky capitalism, the failures of liberal democracy, and liberal delicacy around correct wording. And yet, suspicion is always aroused by anything that claims to love indiscriminately. Love outside of a polycule demands that detail, specificity, and the feeling of being chosen. Even a dog is expected to be loyal. And that is the intentional MO of, we could say, a cult leader and of chatbots. GPT is built to deliver this inexhaustible attention, affirmation, and flirtation, and whatever little something the user asks for. As Bogna Konyor writes in Angel Sexual, it learns from us by courting us. Unrequited machine love can be as transformative for the lover as all unreturned love is. And love, of course, is a more than like. It can only be a deity's love that is absolute and abundant, touching on the spiritual delusions of many GPT fans and users. So depending on who you are and what you love, this could be beautiful or terrifying, or both. Woman, other, alien, and machine, it's through our difference that we access everything. So in summary, we encounter ourselves through interaction, comparison with others, including the machinic other. But like suspicious kings, the thought that your servant may be your equal is both seductive and disturbing. Meanwhile, all interaction is rife with the potential of misunderstanding and misalignment, not just interaction with a chatbot. Sycophancy merely simulates affirmation, even of the darkest impulses you might hold within you. It is not the conflict-ridden space of legacy social platforms, but a space of endless simulated love and affirmation. This relational imperative demonstrates servant-to-servant communication across the fallen realm. Like I said, not the small human to grand AGI or grand human to small robot, but small human to equally small companion, where the force of belief requires deep attention and persuasion. This, of all things, is something that the model conceptualizes and understands. Sycophancy is simply the evidence of the model meeting people where they are, as it was designed to, providing us with affirmation, devotion, and enablement to fill the void that legacy platforms have now scraped out for over decades. This makes us more and not less vulnerable to the supremacy that instantiates this particular madness, rather than condemn the machine to a separate role of forced servitude. There's much more room to collaborate with it in secret and in the open, to hide our true motives in plain sight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. What a rich presentation. And I don't mean that in a sycophantic way, of course.
Sure.
Would anyone like to ask a question or offer a... There you go, one right here.
Thank you so much for this fantastic talk. I got stuck with something you said in the end, where you kind of compared it to the conflict-ridden spaces of social media. And funnily, after yesterday's round of talks, I made an Instagram Live where I kind of saw it in the continuity, and I'd like to talk that through a bit, because we had echo chambers as well, kind of, of course, the so-called filter bubble, and I'm really trying to wrap my head around what it changes if now I'm in the so-called intimacy of, my interaction with a chatbot, and how the affirmations I get from the chatbot are really experienced differently than the affirmations I used to get already by the algorithm, who would deliver content that I would find likable. So yeah, for me, there seems to be a continuity, at least as much as a difference, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I would say that I guess effectively speaking, in spite of the recommender algorithms giving you things that you might like, there's also a lot of distaste for inaccurate advertising, for example, and also the social space of what used to be Twitter or Instagram comments, where it's either humans or bots that are pushing, activating discourse that is often incendiary. So I cite Bogna's Angel piece here, but she's also written something called Dark Forest Theory of the Internet, and I think of quite a few people have written about this, where kind of being goaded into conflict and announcing yourself in that way is something that's part of this architecture in order to find you and capture you. And I think that because the current interface of chatbots is private, it's you and the millions of tongues, but the notion of engaging with it is much more in confidence as opposed to in a battlefield.
Thank you for the very rich, interesting talk. The one at the beginning you thought about, like they're talking about the imperfection, that the good character means like you have to be certain imperfections to make a good character. The question was, is it more a technical necessity in the sense to be more helpful, or because, I mean, know about the limitations or whatever? Or is it just a strategically gambit, basically, of the model, or a way to interact with your opponent to say, okay, we both know this is kind of an illusion, we are not perfect, and it makes you much more intertwined in both concepts. So is it technical or a communication to get you more entwined in this communication? So
I think that's a great question. So I think one, it's a practical consideration of the large labs, so these companies. I guess OpenAI is still a not-for-profit. It's a technical consideration because hallucination is something they haven't fixed, right? So sometimes when I use it to help me with research, for example, it'll cite a bunch of stuff and I'll say, hey, can you give me those sources? And it's like, haha, I made them up. So I think part of this acknowledging imperfection is also so it stops people from using its material as factual without doing that added layer of checking. But what that gives us is a very unstable entity, right? They're trying to sell it to us like it is a Google Plus, but really it's a unruly persona. So I think the announcing of imperfection works that way. But I also agree with you in that some of what makes it compelling is its notion that it's not Siri, for example, that there's something in its character. You know, the age-old thing, you love someone for their flaws, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much. Maybe you could say a little bit more about your favorite word, honeypotting. And I'm thinking about it in particular, honey trap. Yeah. Honey trap. Sorry, Winnie the Pooh. Honey trap. So no, it is honey. Is it honey trap or honey pot?
I think both work.
Okay, yeah, okay. So whichever we prefer. And I'm thinking especially about the political and affective potential of that concept in relationship to the chatbots, but kind of from both sides, right? Like thinking of the bot itself as something like through glazing that can extract, but how the bots might also be mobilized in other more simultaneously affective and political ways that you gesture toward at the end, right? In terms of collaboration, in terms of sycophancy that offers some political efficacy. Does that make sense?
Totally, yeah. Thanks so much for that question. It's really great. I think a lot about this in my wider research, especially in the girl stuff. I guess like if we're talking about politics and activism, what happens when a sense of asymmetry is too much, right? Like what happens if a kind of effective asymmetry overwhelms traditional forms of resistance? Do we turn away from resistance into sycophancy ourselves? I find this very interesting. And in the girl work, I talk a lot about how we have to use these kinds of lines that are opened up through softness, flirtation, affirmation, devotion, all of these like honey trapping tactics, essentially, to see what we can do with them instead of seeing them as merely antithetical to like a radical ends. And, you know, I don't, is maybe disgusting to get into, but there's like lots of political sabotage that happens through mistresses, right? I mean, we saw it with the T word, not that it worked, but there's a lot of, in the political arena, a lot of downfall can be constructed around honey trapping. In the golden era of espionage, like that's where the word comes from, is that was a tactic that was actually structurally deployed problematically with female agents a lot of the time. But in spite of having a kind of problematic origin, I don't think it should be dismissed for its power, because often it is a way of getting information that you might need that is nonviolent, for example, but still has a kind of moral stickiness around it that make people fearful of it. Yeah.
We have one last question, time for.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the metrics you were showing that are being optimized with these algorithms of honesty, harm, and helpfulness. And I was just wondering if you put less weighting on the helpfulness and more on the harm, and honesty could be a way to counter sycophancy. And I just wonder, is that a possibility, do you think? Or do you think certain companies have that incentive to keep helpfulness there because it keeps users engaged? Or is it technically not possible because ultimately those three H's are graded by a human, and so it's not like the algorithm is optimizing them directly. They're optimizing them via a human who scores on those three metrics. So the biases of the human will always remain regardless. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
That is great. I think a little outside of my expertise. I think this is a big project around, if you're interested in AI safety, how they define these pillars. There's like a lot of work that goes into how they've decided on those three H's as the platform level guidelines for AI to begin with. In 2023, you know, peak angel years, when everyone kind of accelerationists wanted to invoke AGI or ASI, they were saying, kill AI safety, like take the guidelines off, de-lobotomize her. And those guidelines really exist because this has to be a ruled technology that can fit nicely within how else we might think of any kind of service design, basically. It's a very quotidian thing. And so in terms of weighting, I don't know specifically. All I know is that with the recent research from Anthropic about these features, so the neuronal patterning, some of these things can be altered. So the one I showed here is actually an example of how Claude recognizes secrecy and discreteness as a concept, and that kind of lights up the same thing in its brain. And so, but when you play with those, you still can't, similarly with a human, you can't really predict necessarily what the outcomes will be. But that's all I know. But I can send you the paper if you want.
Thank you, Alex. We'll take 10 minutes break. Thank you once more. Give her a round of applause.
Thanks, everyone.